Welcome to Hack Your Happiness.
Hack Your Happiness is a podcast designed to bring you the behind the scenes of what brings iconic individuals happiness, plus their life hacks.
I'm Mercedes.
And I'm Anastasia.
Today we are speaking with Ethan Kross.
Well, a big part of it was my grandmother survived World War II when she was in her 20s, and I would ask her about, hey, tell me about the war, and she would never tell me about it, except for one day a year.
Ethan Kross.
Dr. Ethan Kross.
Ethan Kross.
Professor of psychology
At the University of Michigan.
And one of the world's leading experts on emotional regulation.
At the core, what is really the purpose of emotions?
When we encounter situations that are meaningful, and what they do is they
Emotions are contagious. What's going on in the brain when this happens, and how can we consciously spread more positive energy?
I think knowing about how this works is so vitally important. Once you understand that emotions can spread like a virus, it gives you the possibility to
First few steps that someone should take if they want to start becoming more in control of their emotions.
Let's use physical fitness here as an analogy. Step one.
Welcome to Hack Your Happiness. Welcome, Ethan.
Thanks for having me. It's an honor to be here.
Thank you. It's an honor to be speaking with you today. You're such a renowned professor and author and psychologist. So let's start with your story. What led you down this path, and how did you decide to dedicate your life to understanding the mind and emotions? Your listening truly means the entire world to Anastasia and I, and we would love to invite you to join the Happiness family, which is completely free, and that way you'll never miss another episode of Hack Your Happiness. You can join the family by following this podcast on whichever podcast listening platform you're on now.
Well, a big part of it was my grandmother, who I talk about in my book. So my grandmother had this just amazing story. She survived World War II when she was in her 20s. The Nazis invaded Poland where she was living and destroyed the town, killed much of her family, and she managed to escape, lived homeless for 3 years as she was evading the Nazis, moved over to the States, started a family, rebuilt her life. And growing up, I was just, my parents had told me her story several times, and it was like she was my hero. It was like a movie character, and I would just want to know more. And I would ask her about, hey, tell me about the war. And she would never tell me about it. I never really heard her talk about it, except for one day a year where she and some of her fellow survivors would organize this Remembrance Day event. They'd talk about what happened, they'd get emotional. And I just found it so interesting that she wouldn't talk about it except for that one day a year. And it got me thinking a lot about how we manage our, at times, messy emotional lives. I mean, my grandmother had been through the worst kinds of experiences imaginable and survived. That was hard to wrap my head around. But then, of course, I think it's fair to say we all experience curveballs each day, that we struggle with. And how do people deal with those? And so went to college and graduate school to figure out how to use the tools of science to learn more about how to help people manage their emotions effectively. And that's what I've been doing ever since.
Yeah, that's so amazing.
I love the personal tie, because I think it's amazing how, obviously we can all relate to, regulating our emotions and wondering why we feel certain things, but I really love the tie that you have to your grandmother and to, history in general, World War II, which is such a devastating event. I know Anastasia and I were also Polish, and so we've heard similar stories from our parents' parents, and it's so interesting how they manage those kind of thoughts and feelings.
For sure.
Yeah, and it's actually thinking about those experiences for me is one of the tools that I will sometimes use when I feel like, oh my God, here's another problem. How am I going to manage this? I jump into what I call my mental time travel machine, which all of us possess, and I take it back to the 1940s and I think about, God, well, how did she manage that? That seems a lot worse than what I'm dealing with right now. That's a powerful way of putting my experiences in perspective, and I think it's a way of honoring her legacy and really benefiting from her experiences too. So,
Yeah, putting that into perspective can be really important so that we're able to, understand that we're really privileged and that our problems probably aren't as problematic as we think that they are.
Yeah.
You've had an amazing career, and throughout your entire journey, what do you think has been your biggest personal or professional challenges?
Probably, you know, parenthood. Uh, I was always really good at managing my emotions, not getting stuck, not ruminating, experiencing what I call chatter uh, throughout my teens and 20s. And then I had this wonderful child. And then all of a sudden, it was like someone got into my brain and started like moving the synapses around and like cross wiring. And like all of a sudden, I start thinking about things like, oh, wait, what if something happens to me? How are they going to fend for themselves? And there's this level of responsibility that I never had before. And it took some time to kind of reframe how I thought about myself um, and what I do on this planet to come to terms with this new responsibility. So that was a little challenging when I had my first kid. Professionally, there are always hiccups that occur. I'd say the biggest challenges have been the people challenges. Dealing with people were sometimes challenging, and yeah, I mean, not fun to fall into those situations, but they have resolutions too. So thankfully, nothing too extreme on either end.
Yeah, I think we can all relate to definitely the feeling of frustration,
For
or,
sure.
sometimes we feel a bit upset when we have to deal with certain people, but it is part of life.
That's right.
Yeah, I think we can all relate to that. And I love what you said about your daughter, because I think it's true. Like, we all feel certain emotions, but then when we feel deeply for other people, be it a friend or a family member or someone else, it can kind of intertwine in ways that we wouldn't have imagined otherwise. And so, in terms of, I mean, you have kids of your own, let's zoom in on emotions for a moment. What's something you wish every teen understood about emotions?
That could I give you more than just one?
Of course.
Definitely.
Okay, so number one, there are no bad emotions. We all have the capacity to experience different quote unquote negative emotions for a reason. They can be helpful. So anxiety can alert us to things that we need to pay attention to prepare. Sadness can cue us to turn our attention inward to make sense of losses that we've experienced that we have to come to terms with. All of our emotions are useful in the right proportions, but when they're experienced too intensely or too long, you want to intervene. It's number one. Number two, you can manage your emotions. I tell a story in my book about coming across this one article that actually studied adolescents and asked them, do you think you can control your emotions? About 40% of them said that no, you can't. That to me is a very worrisome finding, because if you don't think you can do something, the likelihood of you taking any effort to do it is really small. If I don't think there's anything I can do to lose weight or make my muscles bigger, why would I sign up to go to the gym? Why would I run and lift weights and do these things that are somewhat painful? And I don't know that if I had my choice, I would do those. I would prefer to sit on the couch and eat pizza and Doritos, right? Like, I do those things because I believe they can benefit me. So you can control your emotions. Now, the way I like to make sense of the fact, like, why do 40% of people think you can? There are emotional experiences we have. Our emotions just get triggered out of our control. So you've probably had the experience of, um, you know, brushing up against someone or something that smells really bad and experiencing an emotional response. Fair to say? Okay. Or on the flip side, something that smells really good, like one of my favorite experiences traveling with my kids when they were young is I remember we went to this nice hotel in Chicago, and my daughters like simultaneously, oh my God, Daddy, it smells so good in here. Can we live here? And I was like, no, we cannot. But hotels are pumping fumes to make it feel good. Those are automatic responses. You don't have control over that. Once your emotions are triggered, though, that's when you can get in there to push them around. right? You can reframe your how you're thinking about things. You can divert your attention. You could talk to someone about lots of things you could do. So we can't control the emotions that are automatically triggered throughout the day, but once they're activated, we can push them around. I want people to know that too.
Yeah, that's amazing. I
Yeah.
think, first of all, like the fact that we have so much more control over ourselves and our emotions than I guess studies show so many teens think is so powerful, because I think sometimes, we feel a certain way and we're like, when will I finally stop feeling so stressed? Or when will I finally get out of this like sad funk that I'm in? But realizing that like it's not going to just go away. We actually can have, an effort to put into that. We can do
Yeah.
something about that feeling, I think is so
That's
powerful.
right.
Yeah, and like to feel more positive emotions.
Yeah, and I find it so fascinating, and I love the fact that there are no negative emotions, that they're all just indicating to you something that you need to maybe think about or dig a little bit deeper towards, and kind of viewing them as like a way to alert you about what's going on inside. And at the core, what is really the purpose of emotions?
And what would you say like plays the biggest role in kind of formatting them? Like what kind of makes us have these types of emotions?
Okay, so emotions, I believe, are functional and they're elicited when we encounter situations that are meaningful to us, whether they are situations in the world or that we imagine in our head. And what they do is they prepare us to optimally manage those situations. So they're like little software programs that get loaded up to help us achieve our goals, right? So, you've got to write something, you activate Microsoft Word. If you have to do some number crunching, it's Excel. If you need to surf the internet, do we describe it that way anymore?
Maybe sometimes.
Yeah.
Anyway, it's sometimes like it's Google, right? Like different programs for different functions. Let's think of emotions in that way. Um, Anger, we experience anger when our view of what's right and wrong has been contradicted, and there's something you can do about it. So I experience anger when my youngest daughter rides her bike without a helmet. That's not how we do things in our household. And I'm active, this emotion bubbles up inside me. It motivates me to approach the situation. It harnesses my face often, like I get upset, so it communicates to my daughter that I'm upset. And the purpose here is I'm going to do something to fix this situation. We talked about anxiety. Anxiety can prepare us for a potential threat. Sadness. You've experienced a loss. You can't replace it. You get dumped. You're not getting back with the person. Someone dies. You can't get them back. Sadness motivates us to pull back and do the hard cognitive work to like, okay, life is now going to exist without this person. How am I going to navigate life in that way? These are useful functions. And so that's what emotions are. They are useful. Now, in terms of the second question, like where do they come from? I do believe that we are all born with the propensity to experience emotions, but our culture can powerfully shape them. So if you go back to how I defined emotion, emotions are about what we think is meaningful in the world. Well, our culture teaches us about what is meaningful. I'll give you a concrete example here. Um, I grew up in a family where people would curse quite a bit, and it was just the part of the culture. It was idiot, stupid, dumb. Don't be stupid. Don't be dumb. Like, my mother would say that to me. Love you, mom. Nothing, against it. She wasn't saying it to be mean. That's just the way she operated. For whatever reason, we don't speak like that in my household here. Like, I guess I didn't like being called stupid growing up. I'm I I don't know why, but whatever. We don't. So my wife and I are very sensitive to not using that kind of language with our daughters. Um, and I have a real trigger if I hear one of my daughters say "shut up" to the other daughter. Like I don't say that to them, and I don't want them to say it to each other. So when I hear "shut up," that's meaningful to me, and it activates. I get really upset. Like, why did you talk that way to her? We can go to our friend's home, and these are incredible people, huge hearts, amazingly successful, wonderful family. sit around the dinner table and, oh, shut up, don't be stupid. That's ridiculous. They're not reacting to that language because the culture of their family is different than mine. So it's an example to illustrate the way that culture tells us about what is important to us. And that in turn has implications for the emotions we experience. Culture starts with your family. How old are each of you?
I'm
I'm
17.
15.
Okay, so you right now, the culture that is the most impactful in your life, based on the data, is likely your friend group and schools. That's how culture is impacting you the most. It's shaping what you care about. When you get to work, it's going to be organizational culture. There's religious culture. So culture shapes these things.
That is so fascinating. And it kind of plays into what we were talking about before, like we have control over our emotions. And I think that when we know kind of why we feel certain ways, like,
Yeah.
oh, whenever my parents would say this, it was in a negative context. So that explains why, when my friends say it so playfully, I'm upset, but they are not upset. Like, I think when we have more knowledge, we can feel more empowered and realize, again, okay, they don't mean it in a spiteful way, even if like that's how I'm associating it. And same
Yeah.
with like positive emotions. I think it goes in any case, and I think that it's so interesting to know kind of the root of emotion is so like it is ingrained
and
in
I
us
also think that it's a great way to also then share with other people, maybe saying like, if you're calling me dumb and I know you're meaning it in a playful way, but that just triggers me and I just don't appreciate when you say that because I feel like you're not joking when you say that, and then just sharing that so that maybe next time they can avoid doing that so that they don't trigger you.
Yeah.
That's right. And in you doing that, you are playing a role there in influencing the culture of the groups to which you belong. And I think that's, the one of the last chapters of my book talks about culture. I describe it as the air we breathe. It's all around us, and it plays such a powerful role in how we manage our emotions and other people's because culture tells us about what we should care about. It tells us about our beliefs and values, right? So, what is meaningful to you? But then it also gives us practices to help us manage our emotions. Like my family, my mom and dad, they taught me what to do. I remember when I was a kid and I like if I'd hurt myself and I was a huge drama kid, like not in the form of plays, but I would like really immerse myself in the pain of a boo-boo. You know what I'm talking about here? Like, oh my God, it's gonna be, it's over. I'm losing my hand. And I remember like my dad would tell me, just pretend like take the pain and like throw it out the window and imagine the cars are driving over it. I'm like, so what was he doing? Like, annoying in the moment, but I did it because I wanted desperately to escape the pain of a cut. And I'm reframing it. So it's like, okay, I'm taking the pain, it's throwing it out the window, and I'm distracting myself by thinking about other things. That's a tool that my culture gave me. Religion gives us tools. Like religion has been around for so long. And if you think about it, like religion teaches us how to deal with some of the scariest things in life, like what happens when you die. It tells you what happens, right? And pray and connect with people and perform rituals. So culture's given us lots of tools. It's super powerful.
That's incredible to think about, especially what you said there about religion. Like, there are tools that have been ingrained in our culture for so long that sometimes we're not even receiving them necessarily from
Definitely.
religion, but like, it's just that other people, like, take it in, and then our families
Exactly.
translate that to us. And then what I was thinking about while you were saying that was, it's interesting because in our modern day with social media, our culture is not just like the people we're hanging out with on a sports team or in class. It's also, who we're following online and what kind of YouTube videos we're watching or Netflix documentaries or shows that we choose to watch. And so I think it's interesting because at school, maybe you can't have as much control over the culture or who you're hanging out with. But you do have control over the accounts you follow, the types of content you take in. So that's like an extra degree of control.
I love the fact that you're saying this because, I so often get asked, is social media poisonous? And I think there are ways that you can use social media that do contribute to emotional problems, but there are also ways that you can use it quite profitably to improve your emotional life. I'll give you an example. Like, so I'm reading things and like talking about things all day long. When I get into bed, I want to turn the thinking part of my brain off. I just want it to be in like rest mode. And I have figured out a not what I think for me is a novel way of doing that. I watch these ridiculously silly Instagram reels. Like these funny videos, my wife will like say like stop laughing so loud. Like what are you watching? And then she'll look at it and be like, it's not funny. What do you, but I find them funny. And then I send them to my friends from college and they send me emojis back with tears. And so we now have this like relational bond. And that's me using this technology to improve my emotional life. But I'm using it really strategically there. I'm being careful to not scroll down the feed, which I've already curated. I've already tried to get rid of the stuff that pisses me off and makes me upset or envious. Even so, the algorithm sneaks stuff in that still can trigger me at times. So I stay away from that. I go to the reels late at night. I'm being strategic in how I navigate the space in the same way that I'm strategic about how I navigate the external world. Like I don't go to the wrong neighborhoods. I don't go to certain places at certain times of day. I think the same is true with social media. It can be used for good or bad.
Yeah, I
Totally.
think that definitely, like, we can curate a lot of, like, maybe we're feeling bad if something specific comes online, then you always can block it. You can always make sure that you're not watching that or clicking
Exactly.
not interested and just kind of changing the way that your feed looks so that you can feel better.
That's right. That's right.
And so, Ethan, you've spoken about, and I think that I feel like we hear a lot at school and online, that emotions are contagious. Like if someone's happy, when we're around them and friends with them, we'll feel more energized. And if someone's frustrated, we might absorb that frustration too. And so, what's going on in the brain when this happens, and how can we consciously spread more positive energy into our relationships?
Well, I'll address the second part of the question first. I think knowing about how this works is so vitally important because once you understand that emotions can spread like a virus, so quickly in a group, it gives you the possibility, on the one hand, to influence your groups by like spreading whatever emotion is you want to spread. But also, if you are a leader of a group and you spot someone who is maybe displaying an emotion that is pushing the group in the wrong direction, like you can intervene. So sometimes I'll come into a lab meeting and I notice there's one person who looks a little curmudgeon-y and is like, I'll go right after them. Not in a aggressive way, but like, oh, how was your weekend? Did you do anything fun? I'll try to address that sore spot right away. Why does this happen? What is happening? We are a social species. Human beings, we're a social species. And one of the ways we figure out how to behave in different circumstances is by looking at other people who we know, who are around us, right? Other people are a great source of information. So if I'm not sure how I'm supposed to behave or feel, I look to the people around. If I walk into a new class, I don't know, is this a cool class? Is it a serious? Is the professor stink? Are they great? I'll look to those around me and I'll use their facial displays as information to help me adjust how I'm going to feel to prepare myself. This happens super, super fast. We tend to catch other people's emotions more frequently when we're not sure of how to respond. Um, so, like in certain contexts, uh, I'm super like going into a hospital or, I do a lot of work with physicians. Like, I don't get anxious, or if I see other people anxious, it doesn't affect me. But if I'm not sure, that's when I'm referencing other people. You're also catching other people's emotions who are at your level or above you, who you admire. So it's a pretty powerful phenomenon. Have you experienced it in your groups?
Yeah, I
Definitely.
think if like if you're friends with someone who's, very negative and is always pointing out like, oh, I know I was once hanging out with this one girl for a long amount of time and she would always just pick up on everything going wrong. Like she'd be like, I can't believe that, our teacher's taking so long to get back the assignment grade to us, or I can't believe we don't get more time to study before our tests, or I can't believe that, I don't know, whatever it is. And so all of a sudden all my thoughts started to turn to, that's not a good teacher, or, oh, I can't believe that the test is taking so long to be handed back. And then when I took a break from that and started to spend time with another friend, I realized, well, she looks at it as, they're just doing their job. They obviously have other things happening and it's not personal. And I started to think more that way and I started to feel more optimistic. And I was like, wow, it's interesting how, just the people you're around affect the person you are so strongly.
Totally. And it's a powerful reminder of the importance of, paying attention to the company we keep. But, there's also going to be lots of instances where you're in situations where you're in groups that you have to be in groups with those people. And understanding these principles, it gives, I think, you an edge because now you can, almost like a symphony orchestra conductor, push the group in hopefully a positive direction.
Exactly. We can't just rely on other people to
Exactly.
mold our emotions. We need to bring the emotion that we want to kind of be living in and having in our environment.
Totally. And
Yeah.
I remember at one point, I think this was like a few years ago, my mom told us about this like study that happened with people who were put in an elevator, and certain people there were like more empathetic and would like kind of, absorb the situation and the mood and stuff of the other people around them, and then the other person was more like the person who would like push out the emotions and the energy that was happening in the room. And I find it so interesting how certain people can be more, empathetic and they'll be more receptive to these different energies and the different emotions that other people are going through, while other people are more on the other end where, I'm sure they're empathetic as well, but they're not as, if this person's in a bad mood, I'm also more likely to be in a bad mood.
Yeah, I mean, well, there's huge variability that exists. We know in how people emote and relate to other people, how empathic they are, which I think also speaks to that point we started with about can you change? I mean, there's lots of room for pushing that around, and I think that's a message of hope.
Yeah, and like you said, everyone is different. And you've also spoken about how not all emotional regulation strategies for other people are going to be the same for you. So, how does this apply to sharing versus holding back emotions? And what are the differences and what is the result of sharing our emotions versus keeping them in?
First thing we gotta establish is that um, lots of people talk about expressing emotions slash sharing. It's one end of a spectrum, and then bottling them up inside, right? Or not, not engaging with them as the other. And you have to make a choice between doing one or the other. Number one, you don't. You can do both. And some people benefit from that. That is to say, they distract and avoid for a little bit, thinking about a problem. They come back to it later on. Um, have you ever had a situation in which you were provoked and maybe it was an email that really got you upset or an argument, and you took some time away, maybe a couple hours or a day, and then you came back to the problem later and found that it was helpful to do that?
Yeah,
Definitely.
absolutely.
Taking a step back can be really helpful sometimes.
Right, so that's an example of taking some time away and then re-engaging later. So you don't always have to choose. Um, there's definitely data which shows that chronically suppressing or avoiding your emotions, if that's the only thing you do, not good, right? You do want to have that flexibility. And I'll come back to expressing emotions and how to do that well in a second. But the other point I want to make is expressing and concealing or suppressing emotion, those are two strategies. There are like dozens of things you can do. So there are lots of different strategies you can bring to bear. When you're upset, you can reframe things, you can activate your senses, you could go for a walk in nature. So lots of ways of managing yourself. But let me finish your question, answering your question by talking about expression, because a lot of us hear that when you're struggling, you should talk about your emotions to other people. And a lot of us have a strong motivation to do that. I mean, is that true for you? You often want to talk about the bad stuff in life with someone?
I think sometimes, but sometimes I'm like almost, I don't want to talk about it because then it like makes my feelings more real or makes the situation more real, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, real and maybe even worse. And here's like a cheat sheet for how to have a good conversation about a problem. You want to find someone who first lets you talk about the situation, get it out, and that's important so that they can empathize with you and make it clear you're not alone. But then after you do that, there's someone who helps you put the experience in perspective. Like, all right, Mercedes, like didn't you deal with something like this a couple of months ago? Or, I dealt with something like this once, and here's what I did. You want to first listen and then advise. A lot of people think that you should just get it all out, just vent your emotions to someone else. And we know from research that this is not good. Venting can strengthen the bonds between people. It's good to know there's someone willing to listen to you. But if all you do is vent about a problem, it leads to what we call co-rumination. You're just ruminating with each other. You're like, oh my God, can you believe it? It's so terrible. Like this just happened to me earlier today. Someone pulled me in their office and was talking about the world today. And I started talking about the world today, and we both left the conversation feeling like, boy, we see eye to eye. But God damn it, like this thing here, this ring that measures every biometric I have was like stressed out of the highest stress score I've had. So you don't want to co-ruminate. You want to share and then get some advice.
Definitely. I think having advice is so important because it's not just focusing on the issue, but it's also how can we solve this issue so we can leave the conversation feeling, firstly, more empowered knowing that we can do something about it, and secondly, we feel like we're actually doing something to resolve it, so we feel kind of like relieved.
Absolutely, yeah, and just knowing that if you're sitting with a problem for such a long amount of time or with an emotion and you feel like it's not going anywhere, you're not making any progress in feeling better or, in relieving that big emotion, maybe it's time to take a bit of a different approach or step away or go for a walk or one of the other strategies you talked about because you might be kind of getting into that co-rumination.
Yeah. I know what I love to do is I love journaling because I find it such a great way to, get out the emotions, but then I'm also eventually able, like once they're on the paper, I'm then able to think about solutions myself as well, because it's like, you've kind of gotten rid of that burden of just holding it on your own, but then you're also just able to, feel, you're feeling like lighter.
Well, let's just take a beat to talk about journaling because I think it's a really powerful tool and it's an underutilized one. So back during COVID, we did some studies where we wanted to see like what's helping people feel better about COVID, what's reducing their COVID anxiety. Journaling was, on the one hand, the most powerful out of 18 tools that we studied for reducing anxiety each day. But it was also, I think if memory serves me correct, the least frequently used tool. And I think the reason for that is just it's relatively hard. You've got to actually sit down and write for 20 minutes, and we don't like doing hard things. The reason journaling's so helpful is when we're stuck in our heads, we're going in all these different directions, right? We are thinking about worst case scenarios, we're thinking in fragmented ways. When you sit down with a paper and pencil or on a word processing document, whatever, Word, Microsoft Word, sorry, long week computer. Okay, back when you're sitting down with something to write, you have learned from the time you're little kids, stories have a beginning, a middle, and an end. So writing helps structure your thoughts about these chaotic things and often leads us to find some solutions. And so it's a really valuable tool.
Wow, it's so fascinating to me how it can be such a valuable tool and yet
Yes.
people don't maybe know about it or are not willing to commit to it as your study indicated. And so I think that just even going out of our way to try journaling, like I know I'm big on habits and like building habits, and Anastasia and I have designed like products to help people build like positive habits. And so I think like if we are willing to put in the time and spend those like 66 days to build the habit of journaling into our lives and have like a time and a place in our home or in our office where we journal, I think it can make it a bit easier failure, and just again knowing the science behind it, knowing that it is so effective.
Yes, I had no idea it was like the most effective during COVID.
Yeah. Wow.
Yeah, we just published that paper. And to your point, Mercedes, about it's like so effective, so why don't we do it? Like this is one of the puzzles of humanity. I mean, think about like we know that exercising is effective for reducing cardiovascular disease, for reducing incidence of cancer. It's like one of the easiest things to do, but so many people don't do it. Or let's talk about like being healthy. I mean, I will admit, I had some potato chips earlier today, and I might have had a peanut butter cup as well. Like, I know I shouldn't do these things all the time, but eating healthy, again, no brainer for so many good things in life, but we struggle. Same is true for managing our emotions, choosing the healthy versus unhealthy options. And I think habits, creating healthy emotion regulation habits is vital.
Absolutely. And so if there's a teen or a parent or a teacher listening to this right now and they don't know, like they want to get better at emotional regulation, but they're puzzled, they don't know where to start, what's the very first or the first few steps that someone should take if they want to start becoming more in control of their emotions and they don't know where to start?
So, number one, recognize that you can control your emotions. And if you want to start, I'm going to assume that that's the case. Number two, familiarize yourself with the tools that are out there. They're in my books, they're in the back of they're listed, they're on my website. You could find them for free online. You've got to learn about what the tools are, and then you have to start practicing to find what are the right tools for me. Let's use physical fitness here as an analogy. Let's say you want to get physically fit. Step one, you join the gym. And then if you've never been in the gym before, you see all these machines, you don't know how they work. Someone's got to show you how they work. You've got to try doing a push-up or a squat or a burpee, whatever the favorite, you know, Pilates, yoga, whatever your favorite exercise is. You got to learn how to do them. And then you need to figure out what works for me given my unique goals. Same thing for what I call mental fitness. What are the tools, right? They're like push-ups in the sense that it's easy to learn how to do a push-up, right? In the same way, it's easy to learn how to distance or perspective take or divert your attention. But someone's got to show you what to do, and then you got to start self-experimenting. It's as simple as that.
I love that. It's not ever that complicated. It's really just
Definitely.
like the willingness to do it, really, and to start.
That's right. That's right.
You're still doing it even when you're having a hard moment and it feels really difficult to regulate that. Just knowing that it's okay and that you still have that control that you had 20 minutes ago or even before you started experiencing this exact emotion.
Yeah, and having some, self-compassion and give yourself grace. Like, we all screw up. All of us do, right? And, one of the, when I do workshops with groups, I'll often start them by asking people to think about a time where they really struggled emotionally with something. Everyone is able to think of something, usually very quickly. But what's interesting about it is after I have them think about that experience, I pair them up with someone else to exchange stories. So many of us live in our minds, which are very private. We don't realize, like, we beat ourselves up without realizing this is just part of being human. So, have that grace and then get back on track and keep practicing.
Yeah.
Exactly. Just know that other people are also going through similar experiences.
Exactly.
And speaking of your book, you've outlined shifters and how these are different for different people. So before someone buys your book, can you give us a brief overview of these different types of shifters and how they can impact our emotions?
Yeah. So when I talk about shifting our emotions, what I mean is there are tools that we possess that we can use to do one of three things. Turn the volume on an emotion up or down, so increase or decrease the intensity of our anger or joy or sadness. You can also use these shifters to prolong or shorten how long we stay in an emotion, so how long it lasts or how short it is. And then we can use these shifters to jump from one emotion, anxiety, to another, joy. Um, there are three kinds of shifters that exist within us. We take these shifters wherever we go. One is, I call them sensory shifters. So this involves activating your senses. Our senses, how we consume information about the world, are powerful modulators of our emotional lives. So I'm guessing you two listen to music.
Definitely.
Lots.
Why do you do it?
Because I think we enjoy the music. It brings us happiness. Or
Stop. You just stop. You did it right. You enjoy. It's an emotional experience, right? Like I went to a Taylor Swift concert with my family last fall, and I sat there. Wouldn't have been my first choice, I will confess, but my daughters and wife were very happy. And I just sat there and I'm looking around, and it's a stadium in Toronto, and I'm thinking, oh my God, there were like all of these people, tens of thousands of people paid all of this money for an emotion regulation experience. She's up there with her guitar playing our emotions. So all of our senses have the potential to activate our emotions for better or worse. Sight, sound, touch, smell. Those are shifters you have at your disposal. Then there are our attentional shifters. So you can think of as attention as a mental spotlight where you shine it has implications for how you feel. So if there's something that's bugging me and I think about it, that's often gonna activate that emotion. If I point the spotlight away, that can give me some relief. Then there are perspective shifters. So you think of perspective as you've got a smartphone camera and you're looking at something, but you can adjust a filter on that camera to alter the perspective, right? You can widen it, you can put a rose-colored filter on it to make it look a little bit happier, whatever. And so we possess shifters that can alter our perspective. I could think about, well, my default, oh my God, how am I going to manage this? Well, what did my grandmother do in the 40s? She managed that. That's going to shift my perspective. I think I can do this. So those three shifters, sensory, attention, perspective, powerful tools. You have them. In my book, I talk about different strategies you can use. But then the other set of shifters that you have exist outside of you. Your relationships, other people can shift your emotions. Our spaces, the world, the physical world around us can change how we feel. Being in an orderly place tends to give us a sense of calm. Going for a walk in a green setting helps us rest and restore. And then there's culture, and the cultures we engage in can impact our emotions. If you've ever had a toxic friend group versus a positive one, you've experienced this. And so those are the shifters.
yes, those are amazing. And I love how there's ones that are in us, and then there's also ones that are a little bit external, but still like within our grasp and within like
Definitely.
our control, as we've been talking about. And so, Ethan, a major part of life in general, and especially I think teenagehood for the first time for a lot of people, is rejection. And this is such a big part of the teen experience. You know, whether it's a friend group, a college application, or even a crush, what is the healthiest way to handle the emotions that come with rejection and that intense fear of it happening again and again?
Well, again, recognizing how normal it is to not like rejection. It's it's often described as a form of social pain, and it's something we all experience at times. Here the shifters that I talked about are all potentially relevant, and you don't have to use them in isolation, right? You can use them together. So sometimes, for example, when people feel rejected, they may listen to music that about rejection to sync them, that on the one hand may prolong that negative emotional state, but also make you realize you're not alone. There are other people, they've written songs about this stuff that other people love. Um, if that's useful for helping you work through the rejection, you should do it. If you, on the other hand, want to feel differently, maybe you listen to some happy music instead of the rejection music. Who's a current artist who talks about rejection a lot? Probably Taylor Swift, actually, right?
Yeah,
I think so.
I feel
Yeah,
like
I would
she's
say
pretty,
so.
yeah.
Yeah, so maybe like listen to some of her other songs, not the ex-boyfriend ones. So attention, right? Like distract, positive distractions. Don't do risky things like drugs or alcohol, but talk to a friend about something else. Like go to a movie and like get your mind off the problem. Perspective, look at the big picture. You're going to have other suitors or friends, and we all go through this. So there are lots of ways that you can address those kinds of rejection experiences. And the key is to figure out what tools work for you. We know from science that there are no one size fits all solutions. Just like one of my best friends, I would put his physical fitness same level as mine, mediocre, nothing great. However, the way he gets to mediocrity is he runs every day. I do other kinds of stuff, different pathways to getting to the same outcome, and the same is true for emotional fitness.
We've got some extremely exciting news. Anastasia and I have just released a brand new product on Small Bits of Happiness, and that is Mission Family Time. Ready to connect with your family, whether it's around the dinner table, in the living room, or just on a day-to-day basis.
Here there are 4 card categories: fun, DIY, going out ideas, and talking points.
Okay, Anastasia, grab a card.
Okay. Ooh. So this is a talking point. What color am I? Share your opinion on which color represents the other person best and why.
I think that you are blue, very light, airy blue, like pastel.
I think you're like a light yellow.
Okay. Connect with your family and learn more about them and bring some small bits of happiness to your home. Shop Mission Family Time now. It's linked in the show notes.
Now back to the episode.
I love that.
I love that. I know me and Mercedes, like we both have our different way of like working out. I love to run and she always bikes. But it's you're still working out, you're still doing cardio, but you're just doing it differently.
Exactly.
Yes, exactly.
And so, Ethan, kind of a bit of a twist in the conversation, but you've mentioned loving history, including like the history of emotions. So for teens who are interested, I know I'm very interested.
Definitely.
Can you share a little bit about the history of emotions and maybe a discovery or something really fascinating that stands out to you?
Yeah, one of my favorite detours when I was researching the book, and I spent a little bit of time on this, was just learning about the different methods we've taken to managing our emotions. And so, if you turn the clock back to 8 to 10,000 years ago, our ancestors invented what is widely believed to be the first surgical technique. It was called trepanation, and what it involved doing was carving holes in people's skulls, often while they were awake. And one of the reasons why it was believed to be used was to help people manage their emotions, right? And if you think about it, it sounds crazy, but go back 10,000 years, maybe when people were acting in these wacky ways, we had different theories of emotions. Maybe it's because there's a spirit inside that was causing you to do things. So let the spirit out. Um, this idea of letting bad things, purging yourself of bad things, it's been very common throughout the ages. Bloodletting, if you're sad or depressed, like letting the blood out of you, cleansing the blood, has been with us for a while. So we've been struggling with emotions for a really long time. And one other fun fact, or two others I'll say, first writing samples ever discovered, or one of the first writing samples ever discovered, ancient Persia. When they were translated, they dealt with topics like the pain of heartbreak. People were writing about emotional difficulties. And if you look at the best-selling book of all time, sadly, not one of my books, but another really good book was the Bible. One of the most famous stories in that piece of literature was a story of Adam and Eve. This was a story of emotion and emotion dysregulation. Should you succumb to temptation or should you not? Right? So we've been dealing with this emotional stuff for as long as we've been roaming the planet, in our present form, if you ask me. And what excites me about where we are right now in terms of our timeline as a species is we've got some science-based tools. They don't involve drilling holes in people's skulls or like letting their blood out of their body. So that's a good thing.
Wow, yes, that's definitely that's tremendous progress.
We've gotten far.
But what I love about that is the fact that like we are still so similar in terms of like, I guess, our psychological nature and makeup, in terms of like our relation to our ancestors from like, all these years back, and like those Persian writings, and I guess everyone trying to regulate emotions and have some control over our lives. Although now it's definitely a little bit better with our new strategies. Yeah.
That's right. Although I'll say one more thing, like the trepanation, the holes in our heads, that's 8 to 10,000 years ago. That seems like, okay, we've come far. But if you go to the 1940s, there was a physician who won a Nobel Prize for an emotion regulation intervention. And the name of that intervention is commonly known as the lobotomy. So basically taking an ice pick and poking holes in people's brain to provide them with emotional relief. This is not something that you should ever consider doing. No one does this. It is not good. And yet, less than 100 years ago, this was viewed as such an advance that it won this physician the most celebrated award in the world. Like, that is a mind blower. Speaks to the magnitude of the problem and the progress that we have made.
Yeah. Wow.
Yeah,
That is amazingly like crazy.
That is crazy.
How like close that is, I guess,
I
to our
know.
timeline, and the fact that, well, first of all, we've made such big progress since then, but also like how we've still been constantly struggling to find ways, and it makes me excited to see like where we go.
I know.
In the next,
I mean,
20, 40 years.
If we
yeah.
change so much so fast, it should be interesting to see where that goes, like you were saying, in
Exactly.
20, 40, 50 years. And, we've been talking a lot about your children, and I love that. I think that's so amazing. And as teens, and I feel like we all know that childhood is a very formative time. And, what we experience in childhood can often really help us learn how we process our emotions. But how does adolescence fit into that puzzle? And what's happening psychologically during these teen years that makes us so emotional and formative?
Well, your brain is still rapidly developing, and so the brain the brain supports emotion regulation, and so your frontal cortex is developing further. There are surges of hormones that are flushing throughout your system that are also affecting your sensitivity to experiencing different emotions and can have implications for your ability to manage them. You're also being thrust into different kinds of social situations, which are often novel, you haven't had experiences with before. And so it's essentially the perfect storm to make a group of individuals potentially emotional. Um, and we see that teens can struggle with their emotions, but we also see that teens can manage their emotions too. And I think that's an important counterpoint to emphasize. The stereotype of the histrionic teen, like, oh my God, blah, 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 blah. Like, yeah, okay, but you know what? You can also manage your emotions. There are things you can do. There are things little kids can do. There are things teens can do. There are things parents can do. There are things that adults can do. And I think for me, that's where I like to shine my spotlight, my attentional spotlight. It's not on the victim story, that is, that we are a victim of our circumstances, right? Like, but there's always something you can do. So it reminds me of I don't know if you're familiar with Viktor Frankl. So he wrote a book called Man's Search for Meaning. We'll come full circle, connect it back to my grandmother. So Frankl was a physician who grew up during World War II. And like my grandmother, his family was slaughtered and lost everything. And despite losing everything and being in concentration camps, he was able to find ways to manage his emotions to ultimately survive. if he can do it, I think we all can.
Yes, that is so beautiful. Again, like how if people can find moments of joy, connection, and, resilience in such challenging and devastating circumstances, we can overcome, not getting into the school of our dreams, or not being friends with someone, or a friendship breakup, or whatever it is.
Or not getting the best mark on a test.
Exactly, like we can overcome that.
That's right.
And it'll get better. And so on a final note, what do you do every day that brings you a small bit of happiness?
Just look at my kids and my wife. It all goes back to them. So, getting those micro glances and opportunities to just be with them are the number one source.
Oh, I love that. How old are
Absolutely.
your kids?
They are 15 and 11.
Aw. So Anastasia's age.
Yes.
Yeah, exactly.
Yes, that's right. So I'm in it with all of you. I can resonate.
Exactly. And so if our listeners want to learn more about you or your books, where would be the best place for them to head to?
Best place is my website, Ethan Kross, KROSS.com. They're linked to books, social media channels, and downloads and things like that.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much for joining us today and for all the incredible tips and insights. We've learned so much.
Well, thanks for a fantastic interview. Really, really fun, informative, and refreshing. So appreciate what you are doing for everyone. So hope our paths cross again.
Thank you so much for listening to this week's episode of Hack Your Happiness, and thank you so much to Ethan for joining us today.
What an incredibly insightful and educational interview.
That was
I feel like I
amazing.
gained a lot of knowledge and
Me
tangible
too.
takeaways. Anastasia, what was your biggest takeaway from today?
I think my biggest takeaway is definitely that there are so many different ways to change your mood and make you feel better. You just have to try out those things that he was talking about earlier, all those different types of shifters, because things are different for absolutely everyone, and that you just really gotta do trial and error and see what works for you. How about you?
My biggest takeaway is how journaling is one of the best and most effective ways to regulate our emotions, but it's also the most underused. So I think this is a sign for all of us to give journaling a try, whether you've given it a shot before or you haven't. Definitely give it a try. You can even search up journaling prompts online or on Pinterest, because it's definitely worth a shot, and the science says it too. If you enjoyed this interview, we think you would absolutely love our episode with Dr. Meg Jay. She is a best-selling author and a psychologist and also a professor, and she talks all about hacks to preparing for the future, how to navigate the changing of friendships, as well as tips for dealing with the uncertainties of life.
Take care of the minutes, and the years will take care of themselves, which means, do a good job of your life in the present, and your future will work out. And that's true for 20-somethings. I think it's especially true for teenagers.
You can listen and watch this episode now. It's linked in the show notes.
If you enjoyed this week's episode of Hack Your Happiness, please leave us a 5-star review from wherever you're listening. It really helps us out, and we really appreciate it.
Also, be sure to join our happiness family. It's completely free. We would love to have you. And that way you can support us to help keep this podcast going for free. And you can do that by following this podcast on whichever podcast listening platform you're on now.
See you next time!